Ships ahoy! What do you do when you see a whale, men? Said Captain Ahab to his men. Well, they answered, sing out for him. And then Ahab asked, and what do you do next, men? Lower away and after him. And what tune is it you pull to, men? A dead whale or a stove boat? I'm not sure what a stove boat means.
Yeah, what? Herman Melville, Moby Dick.
That is right. And the reason why I bring this up is that there's whale alert.
Oh, there she blows.
That's the one I was looking for.
Up to the crow's nest we go.
There she blows. Well, we have a lot of whale alerts in the Bitcoin space. There are tweets. That's what they do these days. That is the tune they pull to when they see a whale swim through the Bitcoin blockchain or the Tether blockchain. And of course, this is a way to introduce our upcoming guest, which is Phil Potter, who invented the stablecoin. And stablecoins have been in the news. And there's some whale alerts on Tether. There was 1 billion created. And oh my God. So it just reminds me of these old days that we've always been fascinated with whales, the jumping out of the sea. And we've also had that in the past week from the central bank. The U.S. central bank, of course, printed up another, well, I guess it's the Treasury actually, printed up another $1.9 trillion.
Right. Well, they're going to need it because so much of this debt is due. And they need to pay the interest and they need to roll it over. And so they need to keep printing money, which is backed by more debt. So you've got a vicious cycle. Some may call a Ponzi scheme. There be dragons.
There she blows. You also did in the past week, you did a Clubhouse with Jimmy Song. And there's something that stuck with me. And it kind of brings me to this whole there she blows sort of movement in the whole Bitcoin space of kind of trying to make sense of the world around us through movements of like a whale jumping out of the sea. And you and Jimmy Song were talking about the infinite and the infinitesimal, and in an ocean, which is almost infinite in terms of the size of our planet, how much space it occupies on our planet. But of course, the whale is the biggest creature in the sea, and it thrives on plankton, one of the smallest items, living creatures in the sea. So this notion of trying to understand the world around us through looking at these sizes and shapes and actions and movements, rather than through the actual thing itself.
Right. Yeah. The target number in the SHA-256 hashing algorithm is getting infinitesimally smaller as the price goes infinitely higher against paper money. And within that universe exists the Bitcoin life that we live here on Orange Pill, the Bitcoin life. On one end, it's price go up. On the other end, it's the target number, infinitesimally smaller with each hash heading toward who knows where.
And now we come to, first, before I get to the heart and the meat and the whale of this content in this first bit, we're going to throw to a commercial, an ad break from our sponsor, thesunexchange.com/orange pill. We had an amazing Clubhouse with Abe Cambridge this past week. If you missed it, well, that's too bad for you. You have to make sure to join our Telegram group, t.me/orange pill, so you don't miss the next one. Here's a little clip from, well, our sponsor, the Sun Exchange.
Sun Exchange is the world's first peer-to-peer solar leasing platform. Earn Bitcoin solar power in communities in Africa and be part of the new world economy. Visit thesunexchange.com/orange pill and start monetizing sunshine today.
Right. I really like that voice there. It's so calming and soothing, and it just feels good. You just want to go out and buy some solar cells at thesunexchange.com/orange pill, don't you, Max?
People really like this Sun Exchange solar cell purchase and then lease program, which brings energy all over Africa right now. And you're getting a stream of Satoshis into your wallet every month. And your dollar cost averaging, it's just amazing. And the reaction's been fantastic.
Yeah, and I want to use that as a way to segue into a previous piece we did about the heliocentric world, right? Because we talked about Copernicus. There was a lot of feedback on that because I said he was from Royal Prussia, which he was, but he's Polish. That was part of Poland, but it was just like Scotland. You could say a guy is Scottish, but if you say a guy or a gal is Scottish, they're also British, right? So it's correct to say both things. But, if you research Copernicus, and, we talked about Copernicus because, of course, we're interested in that whole Renaissance period. But there was a guy who realized the heliocentric world like 1500 years before Copernicus. And that is mentioned in that Wikipedia on him. But the reason why I bring it up, because I want to bring this up about past performance and trying to study the movement of the stars at that time of ancient Greece, which is when how do you pronounce this guy's name? Aristarchus, who was from 310 BC to 2030 BC, somewhere in there. And he was from Samos, and he was an astronomer who figured out through mathematics that the sun was actually the center of the known universe. But in terms of like received wisdom, right? So he determined using his mathematics that the sun was the center of our universe. But the likes of Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy, who we all know, great thinkers, great minds, philosophers, mathematicians, Renaissance men of their day, they disagreed with him. And of course, the Earth geocentric ideas remained for the next 1400 years. Now, it's not like those guys were dumb. Obviously, we know Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy were great minds. And I'm saying, like, when we look at today and we look at the same thing, we're trying to look at the movement of the economic stars and the financial movements and money flows and money supply. It keeps on being redefined. For example, the past week, the central bank has redefined what M1 is. They've disappeared M2 and put it into another number. And we're all trying to look at the same numbers and trying to determine what the economy is and what money is. So for 5,000 years, everybody agrees that gold is money. So we're stuck on that, right? Because the great men, Aristotle said gold is the best money. So could we be in a situation whereby we are stuck in the same sort of world of like those who are stuck on, either only fiat, only the government because they could tax, can create money, or only gold is money, in the same way that we're stuck in a geocentric world where the Earth was the center of the known universe because some great men had decided, they found the math to make it work, that it was the Earth in the center of the universe. So are we in that same sort of situation where we're just stuck on these old ideas that can survive, as I've just proven with the heliocentric idea, that the sun is the center of our solar system. So that guy was right. Aristarchus was right that it was, but it didn't take hold for another 1500, 1600 years.
Right. So our concept of money is undergoing a 5,000 year shift. It's moving away from gold to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a change in the base layer of global money, and it's doing so with a superior form of money. So it's closer to the truth about what money is, just like heliocentric view of the universe is truthful. Therefore, it bumped out those views that were untruthful. Bitcoin is truthfully better than any other form of money that's ever come along, including gold. So it's bumping out gold and anything else as being the center of the economy, the global economy, and the global monetary universe. So And it's been talked about for 20 or 30 years as possible. Then in 2009, it became real with the Genesis block. Now we are in 2021, and that transition is happening.
Yeah. And this guy, maybe a Greek person could correct the pronunciation, but Aristarchus of Samos. So his teachings are only known through several sentences and other great Greek philosophers and mathematicians and astronomers, including Archimedes, Ptolemy, and Plutarch. So they mentioned his ideas, and but they were themselves firmly in that geocentric world. But they said, hey, there was this dude that had a school of thought, and I think it was Plutarch who actually suggested they were like a cult, that these guys were wacky, like toxic Bitcoiner sort of people of the time, of saying that the sun was at the center. And Ptolemy, so again, his ideas are still so famous, and yet, so when I'm saying this, like even a Nobel economist or the smartest brains, the biggest brains in the room who get Bitcoin wrong, like somebody like Ptolemy, who could to this day, his math, his contributions to mathematics still survive. He believed he mentioned that this guy Aristarchus of Samos had this wacky idea that the earth rotated on an axis.
Mm-hmm.
And that is obviously absurd because there would be so much wind, he said, if that were true.
Yeah. I mean, this is the history of ideas. Eventually the truth gets out, and then you have to adjust your thinking accordingly. Some people are unable to adjust their thinking, and they don't make it into the gene pool going forward, and the gene pool gets smarter, intellectually smarter. And with Bitcoin, it's now cleaving the intellectually fragile and those who are unable to take a leap with their minds to accepting Bitcoin for what it is, and everybody else, and those who have done so and are living an orange pill life.
But, again, so I'm just saying, like, even these smartest men, it's not like, I mean, everybody who is now in the equivalent of the heliocentric idea of money and looking at Bitcoin, we can mock and laugh at those geocentric sort of people in this world whereby only the state or only gold can be money. And perhaps they just can't see it. Like, just like other smart people did in the past, they even though they were presented with the math and the geometry to explain the sun at the center of the solar system, they found other math to justify their own opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. I mean, that's always the story, isn't it? You need to rationalize and justify an opinion that's going against the reality, and that causes a lot of grief, and it causes remorse, and it causes a kind of post mortem of bodies scattered all over academia who will be mocked, right? So the people who didn't understand what was being said now are seen as foolish. So now the same academics who don't understand Bitcoin today will be seen in 20 years now. They were fools, and that will be their reputation. Nouriel Roubini will be known as a fool that had a couple of lucky calls, and then he's a laughing stock of economists, in 10 years' time. But what you're saying is historically this has happened for thousands of years. The irrefutable truths, when they present themselves, you have a unmovable object of legacy intellectuals or those who have power based around this, and they are willing to get down with the ship, like Captain Ahab will go down with the ship hunting the great white whale. They don't want to admit defeat. They're willing to become martyrs for their own ignorance.
Yeah, well, in a way, that's true, because if you look at Nouriel Roubini in particular, he crosses all of these. Like, he's an academic, so he's like a smart person, just like these ancient Greeks who, they didn't have, the ancient Greeks didn't even have like that the Christian thing of like not wanting to disobey or disagree with the Bible, what was written in the Bible. They were able to freely think without fear of being punished by some pope or something like that. So, and they were clearly free thinkers, right? They went to where they could go. But here, Norio Rubini, he believes those textbooks he's been teaching. That's what he does for a living. He teaches these textbooks on economics and how things are supposed to be. But just like Ahab, he's blinded by vengeance, and all the prophecies that Ahab and the superstitious, the sailors on the boat, they all saw the prophecy that was coming, but he read it as something else. Ahab, they kept on thinking it was something else, and that victory was theirs, and that they weren't meant for the coffin, that the coffin was for Moby Dick, So here, like, his ideas are destined for the coffin. They're destined for mockery. And maybe in 1,500 years, somebody in the future will be doing YouTubing intergalactically and laughing at these people back in our day right now and talking about Max and Stacy as if we are Aristarchus.
Right. Well, the modern retelling of that story, of course, is Jaws with the great white shark, and the captain of the skipper of the boat goes down in the end, played by Robert Shaw. Brilliant performance, directed by Steven Spielberg. And that's another example of the intransigency of narcissism, and vengeance corrupting the mind to create a fateful rendezvous with destiny, and that is to be eaten by the great white shark. And there are scenes there where the mayor of the town is telling people that it's safe to go back in the water. It's safe to go back in the water. There is no great white shark. He swam away. Summer is here. So this is the story with these old intellectuals saying, the earth is at the center of the universe. Don't believe this guy. It's safe to continue thinking in the way that you've been thinking, even though it's the wrong way to think. And so those elements of the story are repeat, all the elements, all the background, the characters, the interaction, the drama, the comedy, plays out over and over again. I suppose we'll have some kind of great white avatar in cyberspace and some Captain Ahab, cyborg, and the whole thing will be played out again in digital space.
Well, yeah, that the final scenes of Moby Dick, you can imagine Norio Rubini, Peter Schiff, the same thing, being dragged away by the whale, still like, I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it. I'm going to prove myself right. Those are the two parts of the equation I'm talking about. Here, Norio Rubini believes only in fiat money, only in the power of the state, not in the power of the people. And he says that over and over in many different ways. Peter Schiff believes not in the power of the state, but he believes in the power of the gold, because for 5,000 years, he always appeals to the fact that for 5,000 years, we have used it as money. Well, for 1,500 years, even Aristotle and Plato were the ones who said, like, we are in a geocentric world. Mm-hmm. And it's not like they were dummies, and it's no reason why, like, who's this dude from Poland, right? Copernicus comes along and says, oh yeah, the sun is the center of the universe. Like, who is he compared to Aristotle, Plato, and Ptolemy? Like, who is he to say differently? But it was different. And we are in that situation of this moment where all the ingredients of this whale alert. Oh, I have this this funny tweet I saw this week of a whale alert, because the Tether whale alerts are, also have an element of like conspiracy, right, involved in it. And Norio Rubini in particular is obsessed with Tether. And unfortunately for him, the New York Attorney General basically disproved everything he has been shouting. It doesn't stop him from shouting like a mad Ahab. So this was a funny little interchange on Twitter where Whale Alert is the Twitter handle, shouted, 1 billion USDT minted at Tether Treasury. And then Paolo Ardoino, the CEO, the head of Tether now, He said, public service announcement, 1 billion USDT inventory replenish on Tron network. Note this is an authorized but not issued transaction, meaning that this amount will be used as inventory for next period issuance requests and chain swaps. I just like when people are looking at the stars, there were some sensible men who came to wrong conclusions, but then some insensible men who came to wild conclusions about the gods and the, people and Zeus like picking up the sun and putting it over there or something like that.
Yeah, it's I think we're beyond all the FUD, because the price of Bitcoin is now racing to 100,000 per coin. It's going to be bigger than silver, and it's going to make an assault on gold, and it's going to pull in anybody who's got 2 nickels to rub together is going to put one of those nickels at least into Bitcoin. And so we're beyond the FUD. That's the great thing about 2021 now, as we head into the summer. We're really entering a phase of panic buying and ubiquity. They like the post 1997 Netscape IPO and .com world, and up until 1997, there was a lot of people who didn't think the internet was going to last beyond just being a fad, including Paul Krugman, by the way, of the New York Times, said this wouldn't have any more impact on the global economy than a fax machine. And a lot of people in Hollywood, where I was at the time, were saying, it's a fad, it's a gimmick, I'm not going to bother with it. And then suddenly, within 6 months, it became the new global standard for lots and lots of stuff. Obviously, the U.S. Postal Service had a new sheriff in town. So now Bitcoin is about to push all forms of money that have been considered money for 5,000 years. It's about to push it off stage. And it's going to happen in the next 6 months. And the price is going to go wildly higher. And then a year from now, at this time, we're going to look back and we're going to be chuckling. We're going to be, Rubini will be openly mocked. Peter Schiff will be openly mocked. And all the doubters and detractors who've been basing their critiques on the flimsiest of ideas and the non-existence of any counter-punctual facts on the ground are just basically going to be remembered as the clowns that didn't see it coming. But now the die is cast, right? There's no, just like the blockchain's irreversible, just like you can't go back. We're not going back now. That's the thing people have to understand, that there is no going back. Bitcoin has achieved escape velocity. It's now, the vector is firm. It's heading to $1 million a coin. I think it's hard to say exactly when that benchmark will be hit, but certainly within a conceivable amount of time. So I don't understand, other than when you would, let's say, some people would buy some goldfish and put it in a bowl for amusement. If you want to watch these outdated academics saying stupid shit, you can watch cat videos on the web. You can watch goldfish in a bowl. It's entertaining to some degree, but it's meaningless.
Yeah, well, the struggle is over. We found the perfect money, and speaking of whale alerts, that guy who realized first that it was a heliocentric world, Aristarchus, he basically, one of the reasons, other than his math and geometry that he used, was just the size of the sun, which he could see was bigger than the earth. He guessed kind of like 7 to 12 times bigger than the earth, but he realized that a bigger body would have a natural force. It would pull towards it. So therefore, the smaller earth is going to circle around the sun. So that's part of why he saw like the better money, just like that black hole Bitcoin has become. We could see it in the response. We can see it just like we can only see black holes by the consequence around them, like pulling in the light and matter. That's what you're seeing in the data of flows of store of value funds going from gold. You see it withdrawing from gold and going into Bitcoin. So these are the same sort of signs you're looking at when you look at the universe of money. That's like showing that the whale in this situation, the bigger body, the stronger mass, the deeper mass is turning into Bitcoin.
Right. And same thing with antimatter, right? You can't see it, except for the bubbles that it leaves behind in the antimatter chambers. So again, infinitesimal versus the infinitely huge black hole versus antimatter. They're similar. And what are they? We live in between the bookends of these infinitesimally small and gargantuanly large. And what's our place in between that spectrum?
And again, before we throw to our whale of a guest, Phil Potter, I do want to say, like, Aristarchus, he looked at the skies, the solar system, and he thought, as I said, the sun was like, I think it was like 7 to 12 times bigger than the Earth. But in fact, the sun is 333,000 times in terms of mass. So, this is also that sort of moment where, okay, we've identified the perfect money, which is Bitcoin. But I think perhaps people are just like not understanding just how much bigger, just how much better it is than gold did serve for 5,000 years. I think it could be a situation like that where in 500 years they're like, they thought I was going to go to 200,000 or 300,000. How sweet and cute that was.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's galloping ahead in real time. And it's changing everything. And now on the sovereign level, governments are changing. They realize they can't regulate it or control it. So they have to change. You don't change Bitcoin. Bitcoin changes you. And so that's happening in Nigeria. It's happening in Venezuela. It's happening in Iran. It's happening in Asia, all over Asia. So it'll happen really globally. No country will be able to escape Bitcoin. And that's where we're at. I mean, we're racing ahead, really, at this moment. I mean, we've achieved that escape velocity. So Phil Potter is an interesting guy. He basically invented Tether, which was the first stable coin, and we get into it with him really deep. Let's do it.
All right, Max. This is like a special double dose episode interview with Phil Potter. He is the former chief strategy officer at Bitfinex. So Bitfinex is a huge exchange, in case you don't know about it. I'm excited to speak to him.
Oh, yeah. Bitfinex, one of the earliest exchanges out there. Phil Potter, I remember, during the early days, a Bitcoin OG for sure. And this is a great opportunity.
So, of course, Phil, welcome to the Orange Pill Podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Good to see both of you virtually, if no other way, but good to see you guys.
We're used to seeing you on some exotic beach in some tropical location, but over Zoom will do. Of course, I have to say, the Tether FUD drives me crazy. It causes me, this is why my hair looks like this. It's the Tether FUD. So it's one of the most enduring FUDs of the past 2 or 3 years, from weird people online like Nouriel Rubini to, people on the internet. So tell us exactly, what was Tether? You're no longer at Bitfinex, but you were there when Tether was created. What is Tether? Why did you create it? Bitfinex created it?
It was... I'm the creator of Tether. My co-creator, I guess, would be, I would say, is Craig Sellers, who was of the Omni Foundation at the time. And but the idea first occurred to me back in 2013, when there was Bitcoin was having its huge surge, and then all of a sudden you had the Ben Loskys of the world kind of chiming in about regulation and things like that. And what we were noticing at the time was that all these Bitcoin exchanges were existing in some kind of very sort of legal sort of limbo land, right? And regulators, I just think regulators just didn't know how to get their arms around that. I mean, they're taking in money, they're taking in crypto, they're exchanging crypto, they've got wallets, they're custodial, they're doing, all these things. And it seemed that was a very, that was kind of one of those things that at least occurred to me, that it wasn't going to be easy for regulators to get their arms around that. However, at least at the time, the conventional wisdom of the time seemed to suggest that a crypto-only exchange like Cryptsy at the time, because remember, or MintPal, or a few others, I guess, seem to be skating under the radar on regulation based on they're like, well, they only handle crypto, and that seemed to assuage, the sort of the eye of Sauron of regulators, kind of, and what they were looking for. At the same time, the whole fiat handling process for exchanges, that was complicated. So I guess the idea that occurred to me is like, why not separate the functions? Why would, and the idea was maybe for Bitfinex to do this. It's like, have Bitfinex run a crypto only exchange, and at the same time also create this other entity over here that was, well, the way I would termed it at the time was, let's create PayPal on the blockchain. And so you put your money over here, you get your tokens, and then you can deposit your tokens over here. And then all of a sudden, like, well, we've got a crypto only exchange over here, which we thought we had, that seemed safe at the time. And then this is over here. It's like, oh yeah, it's a money service business, but PayPal on the blockchain seems, sounds, a lot more manageable than big hairy ugly crypto exchange. So that's where it started. We'll separate the functions. We found some people. We were searching for a protocol, which is how I came to talk to Craig Sellers about it. And we ultimately decided on the Omni Protocol, which is one of the only 2 or 3 protocols available at the time to do any type of asset issuance. And so it started there. Of course, it got zero traction for quite a while, because a network of one is worth 0. I mean, sure, here's some Tether. We have Tether. You can use it. And then, there was we brought in some other partners, and we merged with some other entities along the way in an effort to try to get other nascent companies to adopt the use of Tether. And we had some small players do it, but there was no killer app for it. The first killer app for it was probably Poloniex. So they were a nobody exchange at the time. They integrated Omnicore into their platform to do Tether. I guess the founder was a friend of Craig's at the time and agreed to do it. They didn't have any fiat banking, so we're like, oh, this seems like a good idea. And they listed pairs, trading against USDT. There's no volume there, but that was what was going on. And then all of a sudden there was volume there, and it happened with the Ethereum hard fork. They were the first to get Ethereum Classic up and running, and there was a avalanche of volume over there for that. And of course, we rushed to get Ethereum Classic up and running. There was avalanche of volume, and then for the first time, there was an arbitrage corridor between 2 exchanges, and that was it. That was the killer app.
Arbitrage was the killer app.
Yeah, arbitrage. And then once we realized that, then we were listing all the shitcoins that Poloniex had that we didn't have, so we could create more corridors for this. And so that's how it started. And other exchanges kind of say, hey, we want a piece of this action. And, and that then came the network effect. And we all know about what network effects can do. So that's really the sort of the genesis story of Tether.
Right. And I guess you could call it the first stable coin, right? So that term means that you've got a way to go in and out of a US dollar equivalent without having to go through the US dollar system. So that's handy for 2 reasons. Number one, if somebody has an idea that they want to get out of a Bitcoin position and go into dollars as a trader, they can do a dollar equivalent in this Tether, the stable coin. Also, as you're pointing out there, if you want to go from one exchange to another, I think you could also go into a stable coin, which is effectively a US dollar surrogate, and enter into that other environment. So you're mitigating some of the exchange risk. So it has real utilitarian value, right?
Yeah, it does. And I think that people caught on to it pretty quickly. I mean, I I originally called it a crypto dollar. The term stable coin came into common parlance. I mean, but I consider myself the inventor of the stable coin. And that's exactly it. There's so much. I think it really comes down to settlement times, right? So when arbitrage became a thing, um, the the settlement time on what wire is forever. I mean, in Bitcoin terms, I mean, Bitcoin settles in, I don't know, 3 to 6 confirms, so half an hour to an hour. Uh, but if you want to do a wire, I'm taking a wire out of an exchange back to you because there's no third party wires, right? Back to you, and then you have to send it to somebody else. And these are all mostly international. So you talk about Swift transactions. I mean, you could a round turn on an arbitrage trade could take it a week. Now with Tether, it's same speed as Bitcoin.
Right. So let's go into this arbitrage, because when did you first invent Tether? What year?
Well, we had the idea in 2013, and then we launched in early 2014.
Right. So, we just did this series To the Moon, and it covers the whole first 10 years of Bitcoin. And that's kind of the beginning of when all these hedge fund sort of guys started coming in and entering the space. Yep. And they love their arbitrage, right? So the arbitrage play is really that play between exchanges, in particular at that time, between Coinbase and Bitfinex. So they were arbing. I mean, that's providing a market service and a price discovery service to the Bitcoin space, in fact. So it is a positive to the space. But as you're saying, like, you obviously can't do arbitrage between if it takes a week to settle all the trades.
I mean, you can. It's just that you can't close the arb spread quickly, right? So what ends up happening is you have a lot of market dislocations that persist for long periods of time. And as far as I'm concerned, a healthy Bitcoin market is that Bitcoin is trading at similar prices around the globe. If it's trading in a freely convertible currency, right? Like the Korean won is not freely convertible, and of course that traded at a huge premium for a long time. Indian rupees are not freely tradable, and that was trading at a premium for a long time. Things like that. But aside from that, like in Japan or in the United States or in Europe and other places, you want to see the prices not deviate too much, and that makes for more liquidity. That brings more confidence into the marketplace.
Right. So you're adding liquidity, which is something that exchange operators think about because liquidity is the lifeblood of any exchange. So here's an invention, Tether, that assists in providing liquidity. And it has another great application. A mutual friend of ours was buying a house in the UK, and they wanted to use Bitcoin, and so the house was priced at a certain value, and they went from Bitcoin to Tether at a price that they knew that they needed to buy that house, and they wanted to mitigate the volatility risk at that moment. So they simply moved it into Tether, so without having to go through the banking system and all the machinations. And then when the house was available to close, then at that moment they went Tether to that local currency, right? So again, another practical use case. So the original idea was for Bitfinex. It's essentially, you had an idea. It's essentially an on-ramp, right? It's an on-ramp to Bitfinex.
Well, I mean, the original idea wasn't specifically for Bitfinex, but I mean, I had the idea, and then I joined Bitfinex in very early 2014. And certainly one of the ideas I was discussing with my partner Giancarlo at the time was, hey, why don't we try this? I've been thinking about this for a while. I've been talking to this guy, and he loved the idea. We became partners on that. And then we tried very hard actually to get other exchanges involved. Our original idea was to kind of create this as almost like a community utility, right? We wanted to get equity participation from other major exchanges. We didn't want to own it. Because we felt that by us owning it, it would be considered competitive, I guess, for other exchanges to use. And that was certainly a chicken and egg problem, I think, for a while in terms of exchanges adopting it. It just, the integration wasn't easy, and so
it becomes an inter-exchange token, essentially.
Yeah,
Right. So
that's
when
what it
banks in
became.
New York and all the banks in America, after Citibank invented the ATM card, they all figured, you know what? We're not going to develop our separate ATM protocols. We're going to join one ATM protocol and we're all going to benefit. Right. So you're in the exchange business. You're like, okay, let's create an on-ramp coin effectively, or a coin we can go interchange. People can go from different exchanges, and it's a utilitarian value. It's a stable coin, as we call them now, and it serves the entire industry, and therefore the entire industry, which was nascent at the time, which was minuscule at the time, it has a chance to grow. It's just an entrepreneurial idea mimicking some of the attributes that we see, in a money market, right? I put my money in a money market, which is has volatility. By the way, remember in 2008,
Oh, I remember. It broke
there
the
was
buck.
there was this feeling that they were going to break the buck, and the money markets were going to go below $1. Money market is a synthetic, securitized concoction. It's not, it's essentially. I think Tether has more integrity than most money markets out there in terms of its viability. So there it is. So it's living and it's doing its job, and it gets caught up into. I think with FUD, what happens is, because this industry is so little understood by so many, they just poke at a little thread, and that's sticking out of the dog, and they decide to evaluate the entire dog based on this little hair that they, little hair that they plucked from the dog, and they're saying, I'm going to tell you all about this dog based on what I know about this little hair, and somehow it just magnifies and spreads.
But that's also part of it. The magnification is that if you how transparent it is. So you always see that Tether whales, like people will say, alert, alert, somebody just bought $800,000 worth of Tether issued, or 800 million. Like, is it always a big amount? And they're like, so they see that. But, that's happening at the Bank of New York Mellon every day. That's happening in the whole financial system, but they don't see that, right? It's all behind.
Right. No, the actual creation of Tether is super transparent. Yeah, exactly.
So to them, like to somebody who might have like half a Bitcoin, like it seems like, oh my God, these are huge numbers. What's going on?
Right.
Like,
if Rubini's concerned about Tether, take a look at the repo market and give us your comment on that, Rubini.
Right.
You frickin',
100%.
slave.
Well, so one thing that I also think, there's also a lot of sort of cognitive dissonance out there about Tether. Like, certainly once, Tether at the beginning of 2016 was, would begin in 2017. I think it had $6 million in it, something small. And by the end of 2017, it was like 1.8 billion. So 2017 was, clearly a watershed year for crypto, but people are like, who would ever, there's no way there's that much money in the system. But the dirty secret, well, not dirty secret, but the unspoken truth, I would say, is that all these exchanges were sitting on billions of cash. Because I know that, we know what Tether has, because we make that public, but that doesn't make public the other couple $1 billion that Bitfinex had sitting on their balance sheet, or what Kraken had, or Bitstamp had, or Coinbase had. In our estimation, the amount that was sitting in Tether at the time was probably about 10 or 15% of the total liquidity out there in the marketplace. So there's another $15 billion sitting in exchanges around the world. None of those exchanges are saying, hey, we have $2 billion. The only thing you had was Tether. But people would seem to refuse to believe that people would send money to Tether to get Tether tokens. I'm like, well, why not? If it's trading at a premium over here and you're just selling, and you just go and get it at par and keep selling at a premium, kind of like the whole GBTC trade that's been going on for the last few years. Not going so well right now, but nonetheless, but that was basically it. That was what was happening.
All right. So a central bank digital currency is a reinvention of Tether.
Well, I think that CDBCs are looking to the success of Tether and other stablecoins that have followed on. But I think they are fundamentally going to have to address a few other issues that current private stablecoins aren't really addressing. In my estimation, the biggest one is really a question of identity. I think right now, contrary to what a lot of people will tell you, I mean, Tether and say USDC or Paxos operate exactly the same way. There's KYC, AML checks on the way in and on the way out, right? So, Tether's not regulated, but certainly when I was there, I can promise you the process was very rigorous. But once that's done, once I have my Tether, I can move that moves around in the wild without KYC. And by the way, the New York Department of Financial Services approved that exact same model for Gemini and Paxos. Which to be quite frank, I was surprised that they would do that. But that's how it operates now. Pretty sure that the Fed is not going to be cool with that going forward. I mean, they might be fine with de minimis transactions. There's certainly talk about that. And certainly we have that already in the system. Transactions under $3,000 don't get reported to FinCEN, and then $10,000 limit for other reporting requirements. But I don't know how they're going to do it without there being some way of attaching an identity certificate to the transaction. That's going to be a problem.
Well, speaking of regulators and stable coins, what happened with a few weeks ago, I guess the last days of the Trump administration, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency had said that banks could use stable coins as a settlement layer. So did that actually happen? Is it law, or what do you find about that?
Well, I mean, it seemed like a parting gift to Caitlin Long over at Avanti, I think, I think it's perfectly reasonable to allow banks to do this sort of thing, with the right oversight. And I think it's gonna happen. So banks are gonna be the new tier of sort of a different kind of private money, right? So you have, ABC company issuing a stable coin, then a regulated bank issuing stable coins. Does the Fed do it eventually? I don't know, but I think that there's definitely a huge market need for fast settlement. I just think that there's any regulator, any bank, any policymaker, say what you will about Bitcoin, crypto, whatever. The one thing that's definitely clear about stablecoins is that the demand for stablecoins really centers around speed of settlement, and it's a big deal. Now, we don't think about that much in the United States because we've got pretty good payment rails. My debit card works just about everywhere. Apple Pay, whatever, Venmo, PayPal. We have good payment rails here. Again, it's like one of those arguments about Bitcoin. Why would I want to use Bitcoin? Well, maybe in the US, you don't really need to use Bitcoin for purchases and things like that. But certainly if you live in a country where your currency is, kind of inflating away, well, Bitcoin makes sense. But the other problem too is just the settlement times for fiat in general are horrendous. You go to Latin America, if you're a vendor, selling something on the internet, or you're running a restaurant or whatever, and you don't get paid for a month. Here in the United States, you accept Visa, MasterCard, it's in your bank account the next day. It's a different problem down there. And then in Asia, if you want to do a dollar settlement, if you want to wire money from Taiwan to Singapore and settle dollars, because that's what people want to do, that will take you minimum 2 days, because you have to bounce. The time difference between U.S. banking, U.S. hours and Asia hours is like night and day, literally. And you have to bounce your SWIFT payment off of a U.S. based bank, correspondent bank, to bounce it back out. It's an antiquated system. The demand is there. There is a gajillion legitimate use cases. Sure, there are many illegitimate use cases there as well, but that will always exist no matter what the payment rail is. But the velocity is undeniable. I mean, the turnover, the daily turnover in Tether, it's like 5 to 10 times the float. It's like $100 billion a day of Tether moving around. And Tether's found its foothold in all kinds of non-crypto related industries too, especially in Asia. So, but
Yeah, I remember when I
whole
was
nother
in
discussion.
Ivory Coast, Africa, like 20 or 25 years ago. I went out for dinner. I used my American Express card, and I got the bill in the mail 6 months later. 6 months later. But as you point out, in various countries, to be able to have a transaction, that's the settlement is the transaction, and we see what happens in countries like Nigeria, where they were absolutely mad about Bitcoin. They don't have to be in the traditional banking system. They've got instant settlement. They've got trading, and that's settled in the right there on the spot. And the country's 35% Bitcoin. Now the country is saying, we want to curb the use of Bitcoin, which is a joke because there's nothing they can do to stop it. Somebody pointed out the use of Bitcoin in Egypt. They outlawed it something like 2 or 3 years ago, and the use of Bitcoin has gone just skyrocketing straight up. There's absolutely nothing the government can do. So a lot of people have been saying, Phil, that, Bitcoin is better than gold. But, what we're saying here is that Bitcoin is better than fiat, because even when you go to use your credit card at Starbucks, there's counterparty risk. And those trades, when you're using your credit card, they actually don't settle for days. They don't settle for days on the back end. Or as you say, restaurants, they don't get paid back for a month, right? So this is a huge advance against fiat money as well. That's why fiat money could have its lunch eaten as well.
Look, I'm a Bitcoin maximalist, you guys know that. And I would agree. I think that Bitcoin's real challenge right now is like, well, we need layer 2. Lightning, by the way, is a reality now. That stuff is really starting to ramp up. I'm very excited about that. That will allow for those small types of transactions we're talking about. But yeah, instant settlement on a trustless asset is, it is the killer app. That Bitcoin is, that's it. Now, when we talk about using a fiat surrogate on the blockchain, you still have to trust the issuer, right? And this goes back to the whole FUD discussion. Like, yeah, if you don't trust the issuer, then that's going to be a problem. And then how do you create the level of trust? You have to. The Bitcoin audience is a tough audience when it comes to proving trust on anything, right? So that's a tough one.
Right. Well, just to briefly touch on that, and we don't need to, because it's an open discussion. But there was, as you point out, with Tether, it is backed, so there is a counterparty involved, and as the legacy banking system wakes up to the threat, as they would perceive it, of Bitcoin and everything around Bitcoin, suddenly, if I get the story correctly, the Tether folks were without a bank. And I know from starting a startup in the UK. In the UK, I had a Bitcoin business, and the banks, in concert across the board, as if they were all talking to each other, simply cut us off one day without saying a damn thing.
To one another.
Right?
Exactly.
We got blackballed overnight. And so this is a risk, and entrepreneurs face risk. So now, after this agreement, the New York Attorney General effectively saying, well, yeah, there was a short period of time where there was a lack of coverage, but that was during the time that the industry was attacking, and you were unable to find a banking relationship.
So I can tell you that story. I think it's quite interesting. So at the time, we had been, in the spring of 2017, we had been banking principally in Taiwan. We had office there, we had employees there. The CEO was lived there. It was, we had relationships with multiple banks there. And sure enough, in concert, it almost felt like all the correspondent banks just shut it down. And it happened very quickly. There was a lot of scrambling. And it got to the point where we actually had money there that we couldn't even get out of the country for a while. So we had to come up with really clever solutions to do that. But at the end of the day, we were, Bitfinex was able to get a new bank account at Noble Bank in Puerto Rico. And we're like, okay, great. Well, we really need to get this Tether account open too, and move Tether's assets in there. And that was during the summer of 2017. And we got Bitfinex open, and that was working fine. But their compliance department was getting really kind of bent out of shape about all of this smoke surrounding all this Tether FUD, which I have to say came out of nowhere. Feels like it was a paid campaign. Don't know by who, but there's this one guy who just seemed to be tweeting round the clock, hundreds of tweets a day. I felt like it was a coordinated attack against Tether. Don't know who was behind it. Doubt I ever will. But I think the evidence suggests that it was certainly coordinated. Now, that said, that backed up our ability to open that account for months. And they just kept hemming and hawing on this. And what do we want to open? Do we not want to open it? And Noble Bank actually had a very sophisticated system for allowing to basically settle crypto transactions between counterparties, where they basically had like kind of a ticketing system where they didn't allow money to move from one customer to another unless there was evidence of a Bitcoin transaction. Like it was just basically only trading within customers at the bank, and it was a lot of big trading firms opened accounts there to access Bitfinex. But if they were buying all day and they need to settle, it would be there would be an invoice of like, okay, we bought X amount of Bitcoin, average price of this, and that was the bank need to basically see that in order for us to be able to send money to them. And it was like that, that was they had to have a system in place like that just to turn on Tether to begin with. Like that was how rigorously controlled the oversight was. But it took until September 15th to have that opened. So in the intervening months, basically the money that was coming in for Tether was basically piling up at Bitfinex, waiting for this account to open so we could, basically pay off the receivable. That happened when I was there. I was overseeing all that. And at no point that struck me as a problem. But I think the New York Attorney General felt that that was that action lacked appropriate disclosure. I'm not here to agree or disagree with that, but that's basically what happened. I mean, and that wouldn't have happened if banks, were more friendly to this industry.
You just mentioned liquidity earlier about the liquidity on Bitfinex, and that's quite interesting to me because there's been an absolute collapse in velocity of money in the US dollar, despite a 25% increase in money supply last year. And so it's quite interesting, the actual velocity of money circulating in the Bitcoin economy. You're part of this Bitcoin economy. You're still part of this Bitcoin economy. We're talking about Bitcoin here. This is the conversation. And I want to ask you, like, what do you think on the one hand about money printer go brrr? Like the sheer quantity of money printing seems so, and Max and I have been reporting on this sort of stuff for 18 years now. And this seems so breathtaking to me. But on the other hand as well, like, what are you doing personally, like in terms of seeking yield in this environment in the Bitcoin space? Because we did just speak to Des Dickerson of Lightning Labs, and we talked about Lightning Pool, and we talked about the beginning of this pool of liquidity needed in the Lightning sector. So, tie those all together. It's a huge question for you.
Well, it's a huge question. And, I've been looking at Pool myself. I'm indirectly an investor in Lightning Labs myself. But I think that there's all kinds of opportunities to provide liquidity in a high velocity environment. The reason why in the United States economy, the way it with regular dollars, why there's just this reach for yield. Yields are so low is because it's based on the velocity of money in the U.S. dollar economy is what it is. As you point out, we're printing more money, yet but the velocity is going down. I mean, PT equals MV. That thing's just not working out, right? I mean, it's the whole expression about sort of pushing on a string. And more importantly, like all the money printing that's going on, they print all this money, they buy all these bonds from the banks, and then the money basically sits as reserves for the most part. I mean, it's not like it's going out into the economy in the way we would expect it to. And it's a very weird limbo that we're in right now, where in my estimation, it will end badly. This economy can absorb a certain amount of monetization before there's a hockey stick inflection on inflation. And we may be seeing the beginning of that now. And it's going to end in tears. Pretty sure about that. However,
right. Let's talk about MicroStrategy for a second over there with Michael Saylor, because he's looking at the situation and he's saying all this money printing going on, and instead of borrowing at near 0% and buying back their own stock, he's borrowing at near 0% and buying Bitcoin. So that seems like he's taking a campaign almost attacking the central bank in a lot of ways and saying, if you want to keep rates artificially low, I'm going to be buying Bitcoin. And he's taken this whole different strategy. What do you think of his strategy?
I am happy that Bitcoin has people, vocal, deep-pocketed people like Michael Saylor to help carry the standard. But I am concerned about his strategy for MicroStrategy. I mean, I think that I think that the idea of owning some Bitcoin on your balance sheet is to kind of future-proof your balance sheet in a way. I think that there's some compelling arguments there, but I don't know. I mean, I see. It feels much more natural to me to hear about large pension funds, life insurance companies, other people like that getting involved. Hedge funds obviously been doing for a while, getting involved in increasingly larger chunks because the market cap is much higher. You can buy $1 billion of the Bitcoin and not really move the market now. That's amazing, by the way. And I feel more comfortable seeing those types of players, getting more involved. I think when you talk about companies doing this on behalf of shareholders with excess reserves, or then even just raising money in convertible notes, it feels a little dangerous to me. But that's just me putting my old Wall Street hat on. I'm not complaining. He's supporting the price. He's helping drive the price. But I think I wouldn't say it's irresponsible, but I feel it feels very unusual.
Right, but the idea is that the dam is about to break on all this money printing, and real inflation's coming. So if you have conviction on that trade, why wouldn't you go all in?
Well, I'm happy to go all in with my money. Okay, maybe you're comfortable doing it with your money, but he's doing it for other people's money, and it's not. And people aren't and it's really. I guess you could sell your MicroStrategy stock if you want to, if you're not comfortable with it, but you might have a big embedded gain in your MicroStrategy stock. So it's like, you don't really necessarily want to sell if you don't have to and pay more taxes. You're a little trapped in that decision he's making for you. Again, I'm not saying it's a bad decision. It's just, it just strikes me as the scale and scope feels a little unusual. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I'm sure it'll generate a lot of conversation in the YouTube comments, but I want to kind of combine that with something else because, of course, there's a lot of FUD about Michael Saylor coming from Peter Schiff and the gold market. So I want to ask you, tied to my last question, do you think Bitcoin is replacing gold as a store of value, just like JP Morgan said, BlackRock said, and now Citibank says? So they're seeing it in the flows from their own clients, but they're also looking at Bitcoin with new eyes recently, partly because of Michael Saylor, putting it into the institutional eye space, as well as Paul Tudor Jones. So, what do you
Well,
think about?
I think those players are looking more to PTJ than they are Michael Saylor about
Yeah,
that. To be honest,
yeah. We. I mean, that's why I added Paul Tudor Jones. Max and I, our position here on Orange Pill Podcast is actually that Paul Tudor Jones is the one that triggered this whole entire institutional wave. So
I think so.
Yeah. So, well, talk about Paul Tudor Jones. What do you think about him in terms of what he has said about Bitcoin, about how it's the fastest horse in the race, about
Reminds him of gold back to
and it's a bet on humanity.
I think he's right. I mean, I think the only question about Bitcoin in my mind is when, not if, but when. And I think that it can be, and that when it can be a very bumpy ride. And I think that's what people have to, it's like, look, I don't know what price you guys got involved. I mean, I think I bought my first Bitcoin around $5 or something like that. I mean, so I've learned, I've been through a few crazy cycles, and it's volatile. There's no doubt about it, but there is something fundamentally new happening here. And I think that there are big moneyed interests that are finally realizing that, or rather I should say, it's been on their radar for a while. I think a lot of them, people are just waiting for it to get big enough that it's kind of like, should we say, too big to fail, in the sense that there's the idea of like, well, Bitcoin could go to the moon or go to zero. Well, I think the go to zero is kind of off the table. I think it could go down. It could go down a lot, but it's got enough traction. There's always going to be people who are going to find value in it at a certain price. Now, that said, the question is, is hyper Bitcoinization in our future or that sort of thing? I don't, maybe, but I think the question about whether or not investors are looking at this as an alternative to gold, I wouldn't quite go that far. I've privately spoken to a number of people making these types of portfolio decisions. And what I'm hearing is that the extent to which people want to add to existing gold exposure, they're not doing it with gold. Their marginal increase in their sort of inflation hedge is coming in the form of Bitcoin. They're like, they might already have a 6% position in gold, and they're like, I want to take it to 7%, but I'm going to do it with Bitcoin, not with gold. And guess what? Gold has been doing nothing for the last 9 months, right? I mean, it's 17 and change, right? I mean, it's just like, it's just deflating before our very eyes when Bitcoin's silver's doing better than gold. I mean, so I'm not quite sure. So that's what I think is happening. Yes, people are looking to Bitcoin as that new gold thing, but it's not replacing gold. It's just, I think it's at the margins starting to capture the interest of people who look to those types of assets as portfolio hedges.
Right. Well, certainly we're seeing from BlackRock and others are saying that customers are dumping their gold and they're buying Bitcoin. That ad campaign that came out from Digital Currency Group over at Barry Silbert last year,
good.
Drop gold and buy Bitcoin. And the gold crowd was outraged, but it seems to have worked. People actually dropped their gold and bought Bitcoin. But, coming back to the Tether and the story of Tether and everything, I've seen you tweet a couple of times about auditing stable coins. And what is it that you get into there? What are you looking at?
Well, I think that there's one common refrain with the Tether truthers are like, well, they refuse to be audited. Tether refuses to be audited. I even still see that printed in reputable publications saying, well, the shadow's still hanging out. They refuse to get audited. I just want to point out that is 100% false. I, here in New York, was, actively seeking auditors. We found one in Friedman LP that used to, that I know them from my days because they used to audit broker dealers. So I thought these guys are a good choice, and they were working with us for a while. They did an attestation for us. But then we did not fire them. They fired us. I do not know why. They do not reveal that information to me. But that's what happened. And Tether talked to every reputable firm that we could get that would talk to us, and no one would audit us. No one. Not even an attestation, which is, by the way, every other stablecoin, all they have is attestations. They don't have anything more than that, right? And no one would do it because the accounting industry is really concerned with reputational risk, right? I mean, we could think back. You guys remember Enron and Arthur Andersen and all that good stuff. I mean, that the entire accounting industry has PTSD over that. So they're looking at us and like, okay, maybe we can make $500,000 in fees off these guys, but the unknown fat tail risk, on reputation. Maybe these guys are like the greatest criminal masterminds of all time and will pull the wool over our eyes or something like that. That's what they're fearful of.
Yeah,
So
exactly. It's ironic because most people fear an audit, and here you guys are begging to be audited.
Begging.
Please audit me. And everyone else in the country is like, oh no, I'm being audited. And you're like, I want to be audited. Audit me, please. And they get nothing.
I will say in a way that that Tether has finally found an auditor for $18.5 million. A service is being provided over the next several years where they'll be producing documents on a quarterly basis to NIAG. And I don't know. The public can decide what that means and what the value of that is. But I think that that's a big positive because it's clearly saying one thing: the money's there, and two, that they just want to oversee it going forward. And wonderful. I wish a Big Four auditing firm would step up and say, "Yeah, Tether, we're gonna do this for you." Even if we're just talking about attestations, just attestations. But no one was willing to do it. So I think that that's an important thing. It's not that there's unwilling. It's just the industry is not ready to provide those types of services to Tether or Bitfinex or very many. I mean, none of these crypto exchanges or have any type of real auditing going on. I mean, maybe Coinbase does because they're going public. But I mean, the insurance and accounting industry, they just, these cross-coin trades and this margin and peer-to-peer lending and yield farming and this, that, and the other. They're like, what? So.
Right. Well, the whole concept of generally accepted auditing practice or accounting practices, GAAP accounting, is a huge wiggle room there. I mean, the actual standards of accounting, Mark Cuban wrote a great book about this called The Number, about how corporations report their quarterly numbers based almost entirely on fictitious reporting, and it totally in bed with the auditors, with the Big Four accounting firms. You tell them what your number wants to be, and then they fill it in to get to that number. They don't do auditing, and that's been proven time and time again.
Of course, like as soon as you mentioned the Big Four auditing firms, we also follow a lot of the news in the UK, and there's so many sort of corporate frauds there, huge ones like countrywide sort of disasters unfolding. And it's always one of the Big Four auditing firms that oversaw this whole thing. But the way their country works is that, it's liable to even mention these corporations, so they get away with it.
Yeah, it's libelous to mention that this Big Four accounting firm just committed massive fraud.
That's why CSW goes to London to English courts to try to prove liable.
Exactly.
Except for Americans are exempt from that, by the way, because of Obama. He passed a law in 2010 that you can't sue an American for libel. Well, you can sue them for libel in the UK, but no U.S. court is allowed to enforce the judgment.
Right. So all the major accounting fraud goes through London. All the major financial fraud.
I did not recall that. That's interesting.
Yeah. We were living there at the time, so we're very aware of all the libel stuff. Yeah. So cool. Before we go, I have a few more questions regarding what you're doing and what you see, because you've been in the industry for a long time. Where do you feel we are at the moment, and where are you looking for your own personal investments in terms of like what sort of part of the Bitcoin ecosystem are you interested in?
Well, where do I think we are? I think we are we're at the beginning, I think, of a long expansion on Bitcoin price. So I'm long. I'm a hodler. I full disclosure, I own a little bit of some Ethereum and some Litecoin, some Nero. I mean,
Boo.
Cut him
look, I
off.
got,
Cut him off right now.
you can't. I have shitcoin bags. What can I tell you? But I'm overweight Bitcoin. All right, so let's put it that way. But I've been, since I left Bitfinex and Tether, I've been investing in a lot of smaller crypto companies. And like I said, like I mentioned earlier, I've been lending, and I don't think I've answered your question properly about that.
No, you didn't.
I did not. So I was saying that in the traditional markets, rates are really low, but in crypto, where the velocity of dollars is so much higher, the utility of those dollars is so much higher, and the demand for those dollars in that kind of in crypto form is much higher than it is for dollars in bank account. So you're getting these yields that are pretty extraordinary. So I've been doing a lot of lending like there, but of course things change very quickly. We get up to 50, we're going gangbusters to 58,000. I mean, the lending rates are 12, 13, 14, 15%, higher in some places for dollars, or for Tether, or for dollars, even like through Genesis or some people like that. And I've been involved in doing that for sure. But now we see that there's some deflation there. Well, prices coming down, the demand for dollars for going margin long is down. And of course, a lot of this lending activity was fueling the GBTC creation and disposition trade, and that has gone south in a big way, incidentally. So,
well, how are you characterizing a disposition trade?
A disposition
trade.
You basically buy Bitcoin, you put it into the Grayscale Trust, and then 6 months later you get GBTC shares and you sell them, you dispose of them. That's what I mean, disposition. So you sell them and then kind of rinse, repeat. So what's happening here is that you have a lot of people that are like, there are people who are selling GBTC way below NAV. I think it's negative 10% right now or something like that, even if not great. I don't know. I haven't looked this today, but that's a big deal. And what is it? It's because the people are so far in the money on that trade, they just don't care. They just hit the bid, get me out, and I'll wait on the sidelines until the next thing happens. And guess what? Then all of a sudden, demand for those dollars, goes away, and then rates start to come back down, and then it'll just kind of gear up again, I'm sure. But it's very exciting. I mean, so I think DeFi, I think, is a very real innovation that's not going away. And when I think about the various cycles that we've gone through, it's like, the first one was that, Bitcoin is a thing of value, a thing that we give that has social value. We ascribe value to these zeros and ones, and the realization of that network coming to life, I felt like, was what 2013 was about. And I feel like 2017 was about the advent of, or the coming of age of the issued asset, right? The ICO, Tether, what have you. And then, of course, now this is the new phase here is the other things that, stable coins are the fuel for the DeFi revolution. And DeFi this is a real thing. It's very exciting to see unfold.
How do you define DeFi? What is DeFi?
Well, I would loosely define it as various sort of decentralized or autonomous processes that are launched onto different blockchains that allow you to basically use smart contracts to enforce, certain types of interactions between, one asset to another. And that usually a lot of that will require, usually one side of that transaction is a fiat-based element. So that's why stablecoins are an important driver there. And, I have to say, I'm looking forward to, we see all this innovation happening on other chains, right? It's not really happening on Bitcoin yet. But, Mast and other things are going to make some of these things become more possible. Innovations in over Blockstream with the liquid sidechain. I think there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening there. People should be paying more attention to that, I think. Lightning has the possibility of adding all kinds of layers into its protocol to deal with issued assets and things like that. So I think a lot of that stuff's going to filter back up to Bitcoin eventually.
And
But
the
there'll be
I guess you have to include distributed exchanges in that, and what's happening
yeah, DEX,
in Nigeria.
same thing.
They've now really gone into the distributed exchanges as a solution, as an end run around the government.
They have, and I think that the real innovation there is the concept of the liquidity pools, right? Of the way a modern DEX, I say modern, I mean, but like DEXs of today work, is that you're not really exchanging one for the other. You're really just kind of like putting your thing on the scale on one liquidity pool versus another, and it's very interesting the way that price discovery works, but these are very elegant solutions, I think. And that's the one thing I think is really wonderful about what's going on, whether you're a Bitcoiner or whether you're into Ethereum or what have you. It's like there's so much innovation happening. That's why I'd like to see people be less confrontational and less tribal within our community. But it is what it is.
We don't allow the conversation about any shitcoins in our Telegram group because it's a closed space and there are 8,000 coins. So as soon as you allow one that's not Bitcoin, you get an avalanche of like, how about this shitcoin? And it's and you're like, oh, there's like impossible to have a conversation. So we're like, okay, we'll just focus on that. So
yeah. So, and I hope that Bitcoin, look, Bitcoin's a slow moving animal. It needs to be. I think that the core developers that are entrusted with managing the code base going forward are a very serious, smart, considered lot of very experienced developers. I trust them to implement this stuff when the network's ready. Right.
And I will also point out that you're like the meat in the sandwich of our last week we talked to Lightning's Des Dickerson, and next week we talked to Liquid's Samson Mao. So so you're like in the middle talking about both of them, flattering both
those
sides.
Are all my people. All my people. So that's great. I really thank you for having me on, and it's good to see both of you.
All right. Well, that was another fantastic interview on Orange Pill Podcast. That is the inventor of the stable coin and a very long, interesting conversation. What did you think, Max?
Yeah, it was really, really deep into some important issues. And Phil is, goes back to a time in the Bitcoin life when entrepreneurs and visionaries were inspired and went out there and created new businesses. And now here we are 10, 11 years later, and we see this whole industry expanding to multi-hundred billion, trillion-dollar levels of valuation. So it was really, I remember back in the early 1980s, you had Steve Jobs and Bill Gates starting out with two little companies at that time called Microsoft and Apple. And they went public at that time. And a lot of people were skeptical about this whole new industry and didn't think it had much promise, really. But now it's really dominates the global economy. So, these are the characters. These are the men and the women who create the foundation upon which, the next 20 years of economic activity here on this planet is going to be based.
So the block did some 3 months worth of analysis of stable coins, and they have some really interesting data. And you could see in particular this chart, it goes back to, just when Phil invented Tether. So, I mean, these are like the amount of Tether created back in 2017. And you see it's very minuscule compared to what is going on today, as we see all these huge hedge funds and institutions pouring in. The data from the block does show that it's a lot to do with institutions and stuff like that, because the legacy financial system, those believing in the power of money from the state, fiat, and gold, like that legacy system is trying to interact with this new sort of thinking. And the legacy fiat system, the on-ramps and off-ramps are very difficult. They're very, very slow. Anybody who's done any sort of transactions, especially in the United States, you know how slow it is. But they just showed you the growth of just in the past year. So as Bitcoin, you saw the seismic shift of what happened, how this shift from geocentric to heliocentric understanding of money happened in 2020 once our economies were totally shut down and money printing went berserk. And so I think this shifted the consciousness in a way that won't go back. And you see it in the data that they found. So the growth in the stablecoin since January of 2020 to January of 2021, the supply grew from $5.9 billion worth to $54.2 billion. The monthly transaction volume went from $23.5 billion to $384 billion. Addresses holding more than $100 went from 284,000 to 1.85 million. Daily active addresses went from 53,000 to 307,000. And daily transactions grew from 98,000 to 594,000. So not many products have bigger growth than that.
Yeah, the Tether FUD never made any sense to me. There's a thing called a 30-day treasury bill. And this is put out by the Treasury. And it's considered money. Now, if you have a bank account and you sell a stock and you go into cash and it's held in your bank account, and then 2 weeks later, you decide to withdraw it and buy some furniture or buy some different stocks, that cash is essentially the equivalent of the bank of Tether. It's a basket of all kinds of stuff that they print or don't print. It's not a 30-day treasury bill. Unless it says in your bank account you own a 30-day treasury bill, you own a Tether-like substitute, which is called cash. And back in 2008, during the crisis, as I said in the interview, there was this fear that money markets would, quote, break the buck, right? So everyone would wake up one day and realize, they thought they had $10,000 in their bank account, but it would say $9,150 because actually we had to mark to market what's in that basket of Tether-like fake money in your bank. And it's really this value and not what we said it was yesterday. And if, in fact, there's a credit freeze like there was in 2008, they pump up the ersatz money substitutes. And it's just an intermediary medium that can move around in the financial world, but it's not a 30-day treasury bill. So you've got Bitcoin, and you've got Bitcoin on an exchange. You've got Bitcoin here. You've got Bitcoin there. And if you want to move that value over to a different exchange, you go through an intermediary called Tether. And it is that for that purpose, and you go to the other exchange. You don't have, without having to go into a fiat situation for whatever reason that may be. Like there's jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and it's multiple different tax considerations, et cetera. And so it's not a way to escape tax. It's a way to manage the potential tax burden in a way that is the most efficient, as anyone, of course, would want to do. And so the whole thing made absolutely no sense. So Nouriel Roubini, it's so comical because it's obvious that not only does he understand Bitcoin, but he doesn't understand banking. He doesn't understand finance. He doesn't understand what the Treasury does. He doesn't understand what a major bank does. So he's an economist only in that he's got tenure and he can spout nonsense for decades, and you can't fire him. And he goes on TV and says lewd, scatological things. I guess people find that amusing when a tenured professor has a potty mouth and they're like, look, Nouriel said fuck you and bullshit. Isn't that adorable? But other than that, he's totally useless and he's an ignoramus.
And also, Nouriel Roubini is in the cult of fiat. He believes we should only use the dollar. Now, the dollar, as we've shown, the data shows, if you're looking at the data to see what we are, where we are in this financial, economic, monetary universe, the data is an explosion. It's like a supernova of money printing. but no velocity. And what this is showing, what the data shows about the stable coins, in particular, Tether. Tether is by far the number one stable coin. And there's huge velocity, like massive velocity, just churning. And a lot of it is because we have multiple huge exchanges all over the world. And as Max said, Americans can't avoid taxes on like for like now, because that changed in the past year or two. So, you used to be able to do what the rest of the world could do, but the rest of the world can still do it. And Adam Back talks about this on Twitter. So he'll buy some Bitcoin on one exchange because he lives in Malta, so he's not going to be taxed when he converts it to another crypto, which is Tether. So Americans would be taxed on that, whatever their gains were now. But they get to do that where they convert it to Tether, but he's doing it to arbitrage between another exchange. So if Bitcoin is 57,000 in one location and 56,800 in another, like you can grab that $200, right? That's a inefficiency that traders are grabbing, but you obviously can't do it with fiat, because then you would have to sell it in that one exchange, send it to your bank. It takes 3 to 5 days, then send it from that bank over to the other exchange. So, I mean, that's going to take a week at least, right? So
I was working with 3 different banks to move some cash around on the fiat money system, and it didn't settle for over 2 weeks. And I got charged an enormous amount of fees. And it's like going after Moby Dick with harpoons from moving ships, it's with a peg leg. It's just like, you feel like you're living in a different century, and you're just paying tithing fees to this corrupt ne'er-do-wells who sit around picking your pocket all day down on JP Morgan and these other banks. And, thank God, they're all going to be extinct.
Yeah. And it's just so much easier if you've ever used it, where you need, like we use a lot of contractors of editors and directors and stuff like that, like for our content creation overseas. And trying to send them any fiat is very, very difficult, but you could send them Tether. You could send them any stable coin, and almost all of the stable coins are also pegged to the dollar in terms of those that are being used by people. So people all over the world are using dollar-based stable coins, because I guess they all know their own currencies. The exchange rate to the dollar. You already know it, because the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So it's natural that they're going to pick the dollar as the stable
unit
coin.
of account.
Yeah.
So it's an easy reference, just like a lot of people speak English, even though, you'll see Spanish person and a German person speaking English to each other, because it's the world's common language.
But so, in terms of whale alert, the correlation, causation, and things like that, this is the thing that tied up all of these Aristotle, Plato, Ptolemy. They were trying to figure out who was spinning around who. And sometimes it's difficult to figure that out. By the numbers seem big. They seem, inexplicable and mysterious. And
that's where your senses fail. Your eyes and ears can't really see what's going on. But in meditation, your psyche can feel what's going on. And then your psyche can inform your mind, and then your mind can inform your senses. But most of the time, everything you see and hear and feel and touch through the surface reality of so-called reality is giving you a completely wrong picture.
Right. Well, that was such a long interview with Phil Potter and a lot to digest. So I think, it's a good time to say this is come to a conclusion here, end this whale of an episode. And mention again that thanks to our sponsor, thesunexchange.com/orange pill, the Nimbe project is near completion. It's doing really well. People love this project. We're, making blueberries for Max in Zimbabwe.
It all depends on how you look at it. Back in the Carvel days, remember Tom Carvel used to do those commercials for Carvel ice cream? And they had Fudgy the Whale. Fudgy the Whale was a popular ice cream cake. But in fact, people figured out that they had another ice cream cake. Was some kind of leprechaun for St. Patrick's Day. And it was just Fudgy the Whale, but tipped over on a different angle and decorated differently. It was the same freaking thing. They used the same cake mold for Fudgy the Whale and whoever the little leprechaun was for St. Patrick's Day. And, it's mind-blowing. And you see things in that way. And you're like, I just had to change my consciousness, and I suddenly realized the truth about Fudgy the whale.
You know, these are the traumas that we had to grow up with. But yes.
Well, Copernicus would have seen it right away and said, you know what? That is Lucky Shamrock St. Patrick's Day cake. That's not Fudgy the whale.
And next week, I think we'll be talking with, Samson Mao. It was going to be this week. But, the thing is, everybody's busy and we're all riding this whale of a move to the moon. And I really want to talk about, the ultimate whale of somebody paying either $60 or $69.3 million for a Beeple NFT. That will be the topic of some episodes this week, whether it's our microdose or our full dose later in the week, because this is either jumping the shark or it's like a consciousness that we need to, because is it a shit coin? Is this the new, are NFTs the new ICOs? Like we need a week to think about this. We need a week to go into Clubhouse and converse with Jimmy Song. Jimmy Song obviously is anti any new
I look forward to this. Not. Bye, y'all.